We got an email into the programme this morning saying from a nursing home manager describing themselves as very frustrated, saying that they don't begrudge the healthcare workers access to the vaccine, but our nursing home residents being forgotten again, a second scandal. Our health services regard for older people in nursing homes is a disgrace. Bríd Smith.
Well, I think there's a real problem here, because I know Paul Reid answers the questions and very carefully answers them, but he doesn't really answer them either. So, for example, on the question of the immunisation database, which is holding up the speed at which the vaccine can be distributed.
Now they would say, just to be clear, Paul Reid would say it isn't, that the supply is the only thing that's actually holding up.
Well, I'll come back to the supply in a minute, but we have heard witnesses saying it takes a long time to record the data while you give it to one patient before you move on to the next. This was flagged up to the department by the public health doctors, who have threatened, or not threatened, but have taken a ballot for strike action over their particular situation. But this was one of the issues that they flagged up very clearly. We have never had a national immunisation database, and they should have known, as you quite rightly asked them, why wasn't this prepared for last summer? And I don't think the answer you got was sufficient. And in relation to the nursing homes, yes, they were forgotten about and treated very badly the last time. Their staff struggled to get a hold of PPE. People were making PPE and sending them in. We remember those horror stories, and the rate of death was actually horrendous. So there should be a priority put on them. Having said that, we do have to vaccinate all our frontline workers, because they're the ones who are playing a superhuman effort, if you ask me, in trying to keep the rest of us safe, and they need that reassurance as well. Can I just say a word about the supply issue before we move off it? I think that there is a debate happening globally now about the question of patent, and we need to argue at the WHO, at the the sort of levels of the UN, etc., that these vaccines should be made patent free. This is a global pandemic, and public health should come first. And any country who can get a hold of a patent free vaccine type should be allowed to reproduce it themselves, and we are very well placed to do this. We've one of the biggest pharmaceutical industries in Europe, and we could be producing, in particular, the AstraZeneca vaccine. If we win this argument, it happened before with South Africa arguing for patent-free reproduction of generic drugs in relation to HIV/AIDS. We need to do this urgently on a global scale, and Ireland should be to the front of arguing for it.
Okay, Kathleen, can I?
Okay. And look back through today's lens.
I hate to constantly cut across you, particularly when you're not in the studio with me, Minister. But it's just we have a lot to get through, and a lot of time is moving on. Very quickly, Bríd, please.
Well, I mean, when Leo Varadkar says the last advice from NPHET was to go to level 3 and all the rest of it. Actually, I've written down the dates here. The last advice from NPHET, the last two pieces of advice, on the 21st of December, they called for immediate implementation of level 5. On the 23rd of December, they re-emphasised that we need a full suite on level 5. When did the government introduce it? The 31st of December. Now, what Hildegard or Leo Varadkar won't acknowledge is that what we're seeing now in terms of the crisis we're in is the bitter fruits of their decision to ignore NPHET advice that originally said, as Katie pointed out, don't do both. Don't open up hospitality and allow people into each other's homes. But you chose to do both, and some of us in the Dáil saw it coming and warned you that we'd be at this place. And you haven't even nationalised the hospitals, as the Irish Nurses and Midwives Union have called for. You need to nationalise the private hospitals to get on top of this.
I'll cut across you now, Bríd, because I do want to get on to an issue that
disgrace, the way it was managed in its publication, in how the survivors were treated, the webinar that was held, the leak that went to the press in advance. But also, when we talk about identities and the right to identity in your history, they have that right, and absolutely there's no point in dragging out the length of time for legislation to give them that. But now this report has stolen their narrative. It repeatedly says that there's no evidence of abuse, that there's no evidence of forced adoption, and it dismisses the witnesses who painfully went through the process of giving their story to the Commission, and it just takes the story and throws it out. Talk about an insult on top of injury. It should be rejected in its entirety, and the institutions who are burying evidence, who have refused to hand over papers and records and archives, must be compelled to do so. Okay. We could be witnessing crime scenes here with over 9,000 dead babies.
Okay, and just to repeat, as I said at the start,